The day began cool and bright with a soft wind brushing over the open land. James Carter rode slow, letting his horse choose an easy pace. He liked to read the ground as he moved. A scuffed stone here, a bent stem there. Tiny marks that most people never saw showed him what had passed and when. He was following a trail that had started near a small town 2 days before. A man had left with a borrowed horse and never brought it back. James wanted to set it right. He was not out for a fight. He was not there to prove anything. He simply believed that what had been taken should be returned, and that the land always told you how to do that, if you listened. It was late autumn, the year 1874, and the light had a pale gold look that made the sage and mesquite shine like quiet fire. The sky felt bigger in that season, as if it had pulled itself up and back to give everything below more room to breathe. James breathed with it. He had learned from long miles that a person moved better when the mind was still. The horse under him seemed to sense the calm and walked in steady rhythm. In the distance, the low shadows of hills rose and fell like sleeping backs. In the foreground, the dust stayed close to the ground as if the land wished to keep its secrets. He found the next sign by a dried stream. 2 round hoof prints where the animal had paused and shifted weight. Beside them was the faint outline of a boot heel. He knelt and touched the dirt. It was cool. The edges were soft. This was not fresh. The trail he followed had a way of fading, then showing itself again as if it were shy. He was patient. Patience was the true tool of his trade. He drank a little water, let the horse drink, and put a hand on the animal's neck. The good creature flicked an ear and stood quiet. They moved on. As the sun lifted, a high edge of wind brushed the tops of the ocotillo and made the thin canes tremble. James noticed a tiny curl of smoke far off to the south, and then it was gone. Maybe a cook fire, though he had not seen another person for hours. The land could trick the eye. Heat bent light, distance lied, but marks on the ground did not lie. He trusted the ground. By afternoon, the wind shifted and the world seemed to tilt. The smell changed, too. There was a mineral scent like rain had passed a few days ago, but the stream bed stayed dry and cracked. He found a mesquite limb broken at a kind angle, as if someone had moved through and pushed it aside with care. Care mattered. It told him about the person ahead, someone who did not stomp or break more than needed, someone who did not wish to leave a mess. That thought eased him. It meant a person who might listen, and a trail that might end with quiet words and an agreement rather than hard feelings. The day cooled again toward evening. Light thinned and stretched long shadows across the ground until the shadows met, and the world turned blue. James tied the horse to a low branch and let it crop the sparse grass. He sat on a flat rock and ate a small supper of corn cakes and dried fruit. He did not make a fire. The wind had a tricky way of running along the gullies and fussing at flames, and he preferred not to call attention to himself. He was almost done eating when he heard it, a very small sound like a foot rolling a loose pebble. He looked up but did not move his head fast. The land had taught him that quick moves tell others you are unsure. He kept still and let his eyes slide toward the dried riverbed. There she stood, a young Apache woman at the edge of the wash, as still as a tall reed. The last light placed a thin rim around her figure. Her hair was braided and lay over one shoulder. She wore a woven sash at her waist and carried a small bundle tied with a strip of cloth. James did not reach for anything. He did not stand. He just said in a careful voice, "Good evening." He knew a few words of her language, learned from kind men who had shared coffee with him in another season, but he could not trust his tongue not to bend them. So he used English first, gentle and plain. She did not answer at once. She watched him, eyes clear, steady, unafraid. Then she nodded, one simple motion, and stepped down into the riverbed. Her boots made soft prints in the powdery dust. She stopped within speaking distance and said, "Wind comes." Her voice was low. The words were few and they were true. The wind had shifted again and now carried grit. James could see the far edge of the plain turning pale with a curtain of dust. He rose slowly and pointed toward a rock shelf he had noticed earlier, a shallow overhang near the wash wall. "There's a good place over there," he said. She looked, then nodded again. They moved together without hurry, keeping their eyes on the ground and the growing haze beyond. The horse flicked its head as the first grains of dust hit. James patted its neck and led it under the shelf. The woman stood beside him, calm, while the wind swept over the open flat. Dust strips moved like ghost rivers through the air. The overhang made a small room of quiet where the sound was softer, like rain behind a window. The storm did not roar. It breathed and hummed. They waited, each close to the wall, and the horse settled its feet and stood in peace. In that soft shelter, they shared water. James poured a little into the cap of his canteen and offered it. She accepted with a small bow. She untied her bundle and took out a small packet of herbs. She put a pinch into the cap and let it sit until the water took on a faint scent that reminded him of fresh leaves after rain. She took a sip and handed it back. He tasted it and smiled. It was clean, like the pleasant part of a storm, she said, for the mouth and the breath. He thanked her. When the dust grew lighter, he spoke. "My name is James Carter," he said. "I follow a horse that should be returned." He kept it that simple. She listened to the words and looked at his face as if weighing the space between what people say and what they mean. "I am Nolan," she said. "I go to my aunt." She did not add more. He nodded. The wind breathed again and eased. He took out his map. It was not a perfect map. He had drawn much of it himself over months with a pencil and a firm hand, but it helped him keep the world in order. He showed her the long curve of the dried river and the pinch of the canyon to the north. "I thought he went this way," he said, pointing. Nolan bent closer. She did not touch the paper. Her eyes moved over the lines. "The ground there moves. Tracks can be young or old, but the ground will tell," she said. She went to the mouth of the shelter, looked out at the wash, and crouched to study a set of prints he had missed. "See," she said, "sharp edges. Not old." She pointed to a shallow crease. "See this? The wind has not filled it." She straightened and met his eyes. "Your horse is not far." They stepped out after the dust thinned to a veil. The world smelled like clay and clean stone. Nolan walked with ease, as if her feet knew the language of the land and could answer it. James kept a half step behind and learned from the way she placed each foot. They crossed the wash where the sand lay firm and rippled. She paused to study a tiny flick where a tail had brushed the ground. "Fox," she said, and then moved on. Her attention was not nervous. It was complete and kind. They climbed a low rise where the wind had piled dry grass into soft tufts. From there, they could see the line of a narrow canyon cut into the earth like a pull of thread. James pointed. "If he went there, there is water." Nolan nodded, then pointed to the open ground to the west. "If he went there, there is a house of trading. He may wish to trade. He may wish to hide. It is the same when a person is unsure." James thought about that. He had often believed that people chose plans the way water chose paths, finding the lowest place, the easiest bend. Now he wondered if people also moved toward places that did not ask hard questions. As they descended the rise, the land warned them in a small way. The crust of sand near the bottom gave under James's boot. He shifted his weight back and steadied himself. Nolan lifted a hand. "There is soft ground," she said. She showed him how to step on the darker patches where the sand had held more damp and kept a firmer base. He followed her steps and felt the ground hold him. The horse, led by a loose rein, snorted once and picked careful spots for each hoof as if it understood the lesson. Sunset came like a long sigh. The blue light returned, and with it the gentle feeling of a day closing its eyes. They found a small sheltered spot near a stand of cottonwood where they could rest. James shared a little coffee heated in a tin with a few coals he turned with care so they would not flare. Nolan made tea again, this time with a different leaf, and its steam smelled bright. She took from her bundle 2 small corn cakes and a handful of mesquite beans, and they ate in companionable quiet. After, she took out a tiny wooden flute worn smooth. She played a few notes, simple, like bird calls rising and falling. The sound fit the evening and did not make it heavy. It felt like a hand smoothing a sheet. They spoke in short lines, not because they had nothing to say, but because each line seemed enough. James told her he had grown up where the trees were thick and the soil held water without a fight. He told her he had learned the hard way that maps were only guesses until your feet proved them true. Nolan told him her aunt lived near the red rocks to the north and was waiting with stories and work. She did not explain why she traveled alone. He did not ask. Trust, he knew, was a plant with roots. It grew best in quiet ground. The canyon welcomed them with cool shade and a quiet that felt kind. James walked beside Nolan, one hand on the horse's rein, the other touching the smooth stone now and then to keep his balance on the narrow turns. The walls rose like old shoulders on each side, gentle in their curve. Here and there, light spilled in from above and painted bright shapes on the ground. A small bird flitted from ledge to ledge as if it were guiding them. The air smelled of rock, clean and steady, and the sound of their steps came back to them in soft echoes. They spoke little at first. The path asked for attention. Nalin pointed out places where water had once flowed, leaving tiny ripples frozen in stone. James listened, learning the land's secret words as she said them. He liked the even way she spoke, never raising her voice, never rushing. She seemed to carry a calm that spread to everything around her. Even the horse, usually eager to be done with close spaces, lowered its head and moved without fuss. After a bend, the ground dipped, and the light ahead turned silver. Water, James thought. They walked toward it and found a small pool cupped in stone, fed by a trickle that ran clear over a lip of moss. The pool was shallow but wide enough for the horse to drink. Nalin knelt and cupped her hands, and James did the same. The water was cool and sweet, a soft surprise in such a dry place. They rested beside it for a while. Nalin took out her wooden flute and played a short tune that rose and fell with the sound of the trickle. The notes were gentle. They seemed to blend with the water until it felt like the pool itself was singing. James took the cracked brass bell from his pocket and set it on a flat stone. It caught a ray of sun and shone like a small coin. He looked at it for a long moment. The bell had started this path in a way. It was a reminder of the woman in town who had waited on her porch, hoping to hear it again. "I want to return this," he said softly. "Not only the bell, but the horse, too." Nalin nodded. "We will try," she said. "We will find a way that is careful and kind." When they rose, the air in the canyon felt a little warmer. The walls opened and the path widened until it became a sandy floor, lined with cottonwood and willow. The trees made a thin green roof overhead. Sunlight reached through in narrow beams that dust made visible. James saw fresh hoof marks in the sand, wide and smooth, the kind that a heavier animal made. He knelt. "Here," he said. "He passed not long ago." Nalin studied the edges and the tiny crumble where a heel had pressed. "He moved slow," she said. "Maybe he was tired. Maybe he cared for the horse." Her eyes were kind when she said this, as if she wished to leave room for the best in people. They followed the trail until it left the sand and climbed a gentle slope to a flat area where the trees thinned. There in a little circle of shade lay a bed of needles and a few ashes, old enough to be gray and soft, but not so old that the wind had carried them away. Beside the bed on a smooth rock sat a folded piece of cloth with dried leaves inside. James picked it up. It had a faint, pleasant smell. "For fever," Nalin said. "For someone who is weak." James set it back exactly as they had found it. He felt a loosening inside his chest, as if the picture of the man ahead had changed. Perhaps he was not a taker at heart. Perhaps he had chosen to use what did not belong to him out of worry, not out of greed. The thought did not excuse anything, but it offered a path to talk. They walked beyond the trees and found the canyon opening into a wide plain. The sky returned in all its size, and a soft wind moved the grass in long waves. To the west stood low buildings that formed a small trading post. A flag hung still from a pole. A wooden sign leaned on two posts and showed faded letters. Smoke rose thinly from one short chimney. The place looked quiet, not busy, and the yard in front held a few wagons and a water trough. James and Nalin stopped on a low ridge and looked down. In the yard, a man stepped from the shade and led a brown horse to the trough. The animal drank in quick sips, then slower, then paused and shook its head. The man's shoulders sloped with tiredness. He moved with care, as if every step had to be measured. On the fence rail hung a bridle with a bright strip of cloth tied to it. James knew that cloth. The widow in town had used that very strip to wrap the bell he now carried. They stood together for a moment. Neither spoke. James felt a warm tangle of thoughts. Here was the man he had followed. The bell could ring again for the right owner. The horse could return to the small house with the white door. And yet, the sight of the folded herbs and the careful steps told him there was more to say than give it back. The right ending would have to be gentle. He looked at Nalin. She looked back at him. A light passed between them, not a plan in words, but a trust that they could shape something good. They walked down the slope. Gravel made small sounds under their boots. The man at the trough looked up as they came into the yard. His face held lines of worry, but his eyes were clear. James lifted a hand in greeting. Nalin did the same. The horse that James led stood quiet, and the brown horse at the trough watched them with a friendly gaze, ears forward. "Good day," James said, his voice even and calm. We saw your sign from the ridge. It was true enough. The sign was visible from the rise. The man nodded. Good day, he answered. Water's here for all. The shop is simple but useful. He looked at the cracked bell in James's hand and then at the strip of cloth on the bridle. He took a soft breath. I will explain, he said. He did not sound stubborn. He sounded relieved. He told them his name was Elias. He had borrowed the horse in a hurry when his sister fell sick in a camp a day's ride away. He had left a note, but the wind had likely taken it. He had meant to return sooner, but her fever had risen and kept him with her. When she slept and the fever lowered, he brought the horse here to water and rest before turning back to town. He had not sold anything at the trading post. He had not traded the bridle or the cloth. He had kept them together, as if the horse needed its own small family of things. James listened. He watched Elias's eyes and the way his hands moved. He looked at the horse, who stood strong and unhurt. He looked at Nalan, who watched with the kind of attention that made people feel safe. When Elias finished, James placed the bell on the fence rail beside the bridle. This belongs with the bridle, he said, and the bridle belongs with a woman in town who misses the sound of the bell. Elias bowed his head. I know, he said. I will return it. I am sorry for the worry. We can go together, James replied. We can make the return easy for everyone. He did not accuse. He did not scold. He offered a way forward. Elias's shoulders lifted a little as if a weight had moved. Thank you, he said. My sister sleeps now and she is better. We can go today. Nalan stepped closer to the brown horse and ran her hand along its neck. She murmured a soft word that meant good friend in her language. The animal leaned into her touch. She turned to Elias. You cared for the horse, she said. It shows. That makes the return simple. Elias smiled, a small, grateful smile. I did my best, he said. I could not ask the animal to carry my worry and also feel my poor care. They spent a short time at the trading post. The keeper, a quiet woman with a bright scarf, gave them water and a small loaf of fresh bread that smelled of cinnamon. She spoke with Nalan in warm, easy phrases. She told James the road to town was smooth and clear. She handed Elias a folded note for his sister. The keeper had known her as a girl. The moment felt gentle, full of people making small, good choices that fit together like neat stones in a wall. They set out in a loose line, Elias with the brown horse, James with his mount, and Nalan walking beside them both. The sky arched wide and friendly overhead. The path across the plain felt shorter because of the company. They shared the bread in clean bites and laughed softly when a small bird tried to hop along behind them like a tiny guard. They spoke of simple things. The way clouds tell you about the next day. The best way to pack herbs so they do not lose their scent. How a horse learns to trust a hand. As the afternoon turned to evening, they reached the edge of town. The white door of the widow's house shone in the last light. James felt his chest loosen again. This was the place where the bell should ring. Elias slowed. He looked at the house, then at James and Nalan. I will speak, he said. I will tell her the truth. James nodded. We will stand with you, he replied. We will help her hear all of it. They walked to the porch. The widow came out before they could knock, as if she had felt them coming. Her eyes went first to the horse and then to the bridle with the bright cloth and the bell. Her hands lifted to her mouth. She did not speak for a breath. Then she stepped down the 2 low stairs and put her hand against the horse's warm neck. The animal leaned toward her, remembering. The bell made a tiny sound as it touched the wood rail. A simple, sweet note. The sound rose and settled like a happy sigh. Elias spoke then. His words were clear and careful. He told her about his sister, the fever, the hurry, the note that the wind had taken. He told her about the pool in the canyon and the rest at the trading post. He told her he had returned as soon as he could and that he was sorry for the worry he had caused. He did not try to make himself look good. He tried to make the truth plain.